Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. And today we're going to have another stock thesis that I'm going to go over. And this one is going to be for the company FICO or Fair Isaac something something. I don't actually know the full name. I never cared to really learn the full name. I just cared about learning what the company does. So at its core, what is FICO, right? FICO has really two parts with their business, and one part everyone's really heard of it, right? Which would be the FICO score, which is really the industry standard for measuring consumer credit risk and how likely someone is to actually be able to pay their debts on time. So it's really something where they sell it to businesses for financial institutions to use to be able to give out loans, to give out credit cards, and things like that. The other part that they have is their software services. This is in addition to what they're doing with the FICO score, because of how much data they actually have on people, right? They're able to use that data do to provide fraud management and provide credit risk management and other management ideas for the financial institutions that don't actually have as much information on people as FICO would from their end. So, digging a bit deeper, this is really something we want to take a look at, right? The FICO score is accounting for about 60% of FICO's revenue and 80% of their profit. So this is basically all that FICO is, right? If this business gets really, in a large point, disrupted, FICO is not worth nearly as much as it is right now, but it is a really strong pillar for this company, and it's not easy to disrupt this pillar. So what the FICO score is, right? As I said earlier, it's selling the scores to financial institutions, right? This is how they make their money off of this, so that financial institutions feel comfortable giving out credit cards, giving out mortgages, giving out different types of loans to people who they don't really know, right? You might know your friend, and you're like, okay, yeah, my friend, I'll lend you like $50, right? And that's not, and you know they'll pay you back. But say someone random off the street really asks, hey, can I borrow $2,000 off of you, right? There's or borrow $20,000 from you, right? There's no real easy way for you to know whether or not they can pay you back, and that's the same thing that goes for financial institutions, and they will rely on something like the FICO score to say yes, whether yes, you are reliable to pay back to me, or no, you're really not, and I don't really want to give that money back to you, give that money to you. The FICO score is essentially a monopoly, right? There's nothing else like it in the market right now. And the Vantage score is something that's coming up, and it is definitely something that other companies do want there as a competitor to the FICO score. But the FICO score has been the industry standard for so long that even if something like Vantage score comes up, it will be a bit of time before regulators are super comfortable saying, yes, we can just completely get rid of FICO score and you're able to choose one between one or the other. And in addition to that, the FICO score is also relatively low pricing compared to how much companies stand to lose or the yeah, essentially how much companies stand to lose or how much the loans are actually worth, right? Like for example, FICO scores really are like $5, $10. And if you're taking out a mortgage of a couple $100,000, you're not looking at that $5, right? Even when we talk in the financial industries about basis points, right? That's like oh, a tenth of a percent. That's not even you're not even looking at basis points here for how much that the scores actually cost. So FICO does have some leeway with the pricing there as well. So the other part that they have, right, is their software services. Those of you that can do math, right, which is assuming everyone, you can see that this is probably about 40% of their revenue and 20% of their earnings, which means that this is doesn't make as much, and the revenue side and the margin side is not nearly as high. So what they have here for software services, right? You have enterprise level services, you have fraud management, credit risk management, consumer lifestyle management. All of this really points to what FICO has as data on the consumer and being able to judge whether or not an action by the consumer is actually by the consumer, by fraud, and how to retain that much more from the consumer, right? Get more money out of the consumer. So fraud management reduces fraud losses, right? So if you are swiping your card and someone else steals it somehow, FICO is going to be like, hey, this isn't right, and the issuing credit card don't have to pay that up immediately. So that will reduce how much they lose off of fraud. Credit risk management, it streamlines essentially the application process. So FICO will provide you the score and then provide you a process to make that faster. customer life cycle, that is really to optimize and personalize products to the consumers. So things like credit card rewards, items like that, where they can provide the data to consumers, not the consumers rather, but the financial institutions, so that the financial institutions are able to more readily provide a better experience for their consumers so that they stay on with them. This is really just like from Visa, the value add service that Visa really provides for its partners. And this is what FICO can provide for its partners as well. So those are the two segments of FICO. So let's get into tailwinds and then we'll get into headwinds. So I really see four tailwinds for FICO right now. One of them, increasingly data hungry world. This is the same thing as one of the tailwinds for Visa. And because both of them are in this data driven space, this is definitely a tailwind for both of the companies. FICO has incredibly strong pricing power due to the fact of how low their cost is compared to how much they're actually able to save people, and the fact that they are a de facto monopoly. Next up, we also have monetary policy and economic conditions. This one gets a bit trickier, and I'll dig into that a bit more, partially because of extra lending and partially because of increased dependency and wanting more security on money lent. And finally, you have this international and cross-industry expansion. This is really something that FICO is looking to do. They are looking to expand outside of the United States. They are looking to expand to different industries with the amount of data that they have on people. So let's take a look at the first tailwind, increasingly data hungry world. This is a same tailwind as for Visa. This is really, they can actually make more in the software segment, right? The segment that is currently growing, that really currently provides a smaller percentage of their revenue, but that is definitely an area that can diversify away from their core business. Increasingly more data means better fraud detection. They can sell better customer engagement. They can optimize pricing for their their financial partners. They can provide alternative data sources, right? Things from buy now, pay later, and other sources that really they have they have that resource together that a lot of other companies would be hungry for that data to be able to see, yes, we do want to know where our customers are going, where they're spending their money, and whether or not, because of their credit spending history, are they worthy of actually taking out this $200,000 loan or $500,000 mortgage, or maybe even if it's just like $50,000 auto loan, right? All of these is definitely something that is impactful. And on that note, I do think that it is a somewhat of a medium impact for FICO, simply due to the fact that we do know that this is coming. We know that it's coming down the pipeline, and FICO's already been working on this project for as long as they have been a business. So it's a tailwind that they've been riding already. So most of it is already factored into the pricing. Next up is the strong pricing power. This is a very big tailwind for FICO. This is something that any company would love to have. 90% of US lenders use it, right? This is ridiculous. You cannot get 90% of America to agree on anything. And yet 90% of America uses FICO scores. So they are stuck ingrained inside of essentially American culture at this point. And anyone that really wants to buy a house or a credit card, you're looking at the FICO score, which is about $5-10, and you have to essentially pay that up. So, but with that $5-10, right, it's tiny in comparison to the loan sizes you're getting, right? So $5 or $10 on top of an auto loan, that's like $50-60,000, or on top of a mortgage, that's hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of dollars. Absolutely drop in the bucket. No one looks at that. Your realtor fees are going to be much higher than that, and your car dealership commissions are going to be higher than that. And another thing is if you look at it from the lender side, right? It's tiny in comparison to how much they could lose. If you're writing out a check essentially for $500,000, you would want to pay up, okay, that's fine. I'll pay you $5 so that I know I'll get this dollar amount back. I'm okay hedging that risk just a little bit, right? And what this means is because that's just their strong pricing power, it means that even in tough times when maybe they're the amount of FICO scores that people are asking for is not increasing as much, they can actually raise the price a bit more to sustain pricing growth. And this is also going to be increasing their margins. This is definitely something that every single company wants to be. somewhere every company wants to be in a position, and they have a very strong position as a market leader and a de facto monopoly. So next up, I do want to talk about the monetary policy and economic conditions, which I touched upon earlier. So with easing economic policy, right, not economic, monetary policy, with the Federal Reserve lowering rates, that is a boon for FICO because it means that more people are going to be able to go out and buy mortgages. Not buy mortgages, but apply for mortgages because house and mortgage rates are going to go down. This means that more credit checks are in need, right? So this means that more business for FICO. A worsening market economic conditions, this is something which I don't wish on anyone, but we do see this as currently happening. But this really is actually somehow good for FICO, I at least argue. This is why I put the overall impact is low. But a worsening economic conditions really means that lenders are going to rely on FICO score a bit more because they need to be more cautious in who they lend the money to because not as many people are going to be able to pay back the money that they need, right? So credit cards, as if you're living paycheck to paycheck on credit cards, do you really want to lend that person money? You would want to know that the person you're giving a fifth credit card has been paying their credit cards on time, or if they've been doing living paycheck to paycheck and barely scraping by on the credit cards. You would want to know that before you lend them another credit card. And on the same vein, right, as consumers are applying for more and more loans to keep their head above water with buy now, pay later, this is going to be increasing the amount of scores that they're requesting from FICO, which is going to be in turn raising the amount of revenue they're able to generate. It is a sad tailwind, but it is definitely something we do need to think about because it is something that will impact companies in different ways. And for FICO, I do think this is more of a tailwind than a headwind. But overall, I do think this is a relatively low impact in comparison to the other tailwinds that FICO already has. International and cross-industry expansion. FICO right now is based in the US and essentially is based off of the US mortgage system. So FICO is looking to expand to more countries, 40 more countries, right? And that's going to be expanding the total addressable market, which is going to be amazing for them, right? Because more consumers to use, and they can leverage their expertise from the US into other areas. If they could break into different mortgage or housing industries, it would be a great boon for the company. They also have a lot of data that most companies aren't actually given access to, and a lot of experience in modeling that data and transforming that data into interpretable information. So this could be just can lend them into expansion into healthcare, insurance, and underwriting for using that data to see where things are playing out and really providing them an extra source of income. I do see this as a medium-ish tailwind, a bit higher than where they are for a bit higher than the tailwind that comes from the economic conditions, simply due to the fact that it is diversifying them away from what will become one of their headwinds, as we'll see, which is their concentration risk. So headwinds, this is definitely something that we do want to take a look at. Regulations. For FICO, because of their de facto monopoly status, regulations are actually a big toll on them. Concentration risk. Their concentration in the US mortgage market is also a key risk, simply because if the mortgage market does not do as well as expected, if less people are taking out mortgages, then FICO itself will suffer a lot more than a company that is more diversified. And competition, this is also something that is pretty important to FICO, simply because they are a de facto monopoly. Anyone who is able to take up a bit of market share eats into a lot of FICO's revenue, right? For example, we'll see this in a sec. So regulation, right? We know monopolies draw the attention of regulators. And earlier this year, we saw a really big crash in FICO's pricing. And was that caused by? That was really caused by the Federal Housing Finance Agency, or FHFA, which really said that they were going to allow VantageScore as an alternative source of credit scoring compared to the FICO score. And they were talking about reducing the number of scores needed when actually making a mortgage. This is directly in competition with FICO's bottom line. They are looking at FICO and saying, okay, we are going to force you to have competition and take away that monopoly status, making it so that your pricing power is not as strong as it once was. And this is definitely a high impact for FICO because that pricing power is such an important factor for them to be able to expand their margins and to sustain their business for the long term. Concentration risk, like I said, because 54% of their revenue comes from US mortgages. If any drop in mortgage applications happen, it is hard for them to really counteract that, except for raising their prices. However, being on that point, right, they are attempting to diversify. They're diversifying using their software systems. They're diversifying into other areas. And this is why I don't think this is as big of a issue as people you might think, simply because management has already identified this risk and are working on mitigating it versus something like regulators. They can't really, management cannot mitigate what regulators are going to say. They can lobby regulators and all that. But at the end of the day, regulators are going to do what regulators do versus concentration risk is something within the management's hands. And management for FICO has been historically great. Competition. This is in line with something with a different area, like the regulations. Simply because they are a monopoly, anyone who is able to jump in, right, is any market share that is taken is taken directly from FICO. It's not like a very spread out market where everyone can really grow. For a company that is a de facto monopoly, any small company that comes up and takes market share is taking market share directly from them. So, like I said, the VantageScore score 4.0 is something that regulators just recently approved to say, yes, you guys are okay to be used. And we do see that alternative data to judge creditworthiness is in the pipelines, right? We see companies are trying to use rent payments and utility payments and other bill payments to build up a credit history rather than just credit cards and the information that FICO currently gathers. I don't think this is as big of an issue simply because FICO's been at the top of the game for so long. They've seen the competitors. I highly doubt that management doesn't see any of this happening, and I highly doubt that management doesn't see the possibilities of integrating these new data sources as a source for that FICO score already. So that being said, what is the overall thesis of FICO? I think I'll start at the bottom here. I think most of the headwinds and the tailwinds have already been priced into FICO, and they've been priced in pretty well. I don't think that the pricing power is as much of a tailwind as it would be necessarily for a company that doesn't have as much regulatory scrutiny. But because it is scrutinized so hard by regulations and regulators, that pricing power isn't as strong as you would like to see it being. That being said, right, a bunch of the tailwinds management probably has already identified them and they're diversifying away from it and they're looking at ways to expand their current moat and stay ahead of the competition. So that being said, where do I think of FICO? I do see them as being strong, but I do see their future growth being a bit slower than what they've been in the past 5 to 10 years, simply because of that increased competition, increased scrutiny from regulators. But if you hold this company, right, it is still an amazing company. I don't doubt that it's going to do amazing things for its stockholders. So finally, let's take a look at where I think the price is going. All right. From a revenue standpoint, I do see that it is relatively overpriced right now. It's probably somewhere around 11 to 1200 range. Simply, I do think that part of it comes down to the fact that right now its valuation is really high. It does have a very high value, like you think it's a 40 valuation, whereas historically it's only been around around 30s. The free cash flow has been growing rapidly, right? So this is definitely something that we do want to take into account. Free cash flow analysis, I do see the free cash flow growing similar rates, which means that they're actually at about a 1600 intrinsic value from free cash flow standpoint. Overall, I am putting my overall intrinsic value at somewhere between those two numbers at a 1400, which makes my target at 1610. At a current price of 1500-ish, I do think that FICO is just a hold. I do see upside to the company. However, I do see that a lot of this upside has already been priced in. Thank you guys so much for listening, and let me know if there's any other companies you guys would like to see me do a thesis on. And if there's anything you guys disagree with, leave it in the comments. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, subscribe, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day.